Hi guys, welcome to Informer. Please like our video and subscribe our channel. It's really hard to know when a marriage starts to go wrong, especially when you've trusted each other completely for so many years. My wife surprised me by admitting she fell in love with someone else at first sight after we'd been married for 25 years. I felt sad and shattered, but then she said something that really stunned me. You know that scene in The Godfather where Michael Corleone sees a woman in Italy and falls in love instantly? His Sicilian bodyguards notice and talk about how he's been hit by love's lightning bolt. Well, that's not just in the movies. I saw it happen with my wife, though I didn't realize it at the time. It wasn't when she met me, but 25 years into our marriage with another man. That marked the start of our marriage falling apart, even though I thought everything was perfect. I sometimes jump ahead when thinking about my past and how things were supposed to happen, but didn't. Maybe I should start at the beginning and tell you about myself. My name is Alan Gregerson, but everyone calls me Greg. I'm 50 years old and live in a small city in the Midwest, about 2 hours from Chicago. I work as an accountant for a big company that operates nationwide. The job can be a bit boring, but the pay is good, and except for busy times in March and April, I usually work about 40 hours a week without having to work on weekends. I used to be married until 2 years ago. My ex-wife and I have a daughter named Morgan. She's 25 years old, married, has a child of her own, and lives in Denver. After being married for 26 years, my ex and I ended up getting divorced, even though I thought the first 25 years were great, as I mentioned. I first met Tracy when I was in my second year at Iowa State University in Ames. She was also a sophomore, and she had transferred to my dorm after her first year at another college. I saw her standing outside the dorm in the bright August sun of Iowa as I walked in with some friends. I joked to my friends that I was going to introduce myself to the future Mrs. Gregerson. They looked at Tracy and were impressed. I heard the words, but I couldn't say which one had spoken. I was completely captivated by this blonde beauty reclining on a towel in a bikini beside the dorm. Leaving my friends behind, I approached her, but as I got within about 4 feet, she propped herself up on one elbow and waved me off with her other hand. I felt crushed until she spoke up. "Hey, idiot, you're blocking my sun." I swiftly shifted about a foot to my right, allowing the sun to cascade back onto the enchanting woman beside me. Her megawatt smile illuminated me, and in that moment I would have gladly acquiesced to any request she made. "Much improved, you dolt," she chuckled. She didn't appear fazed by the presence of a stranger approaching her. I suppose when you possess her level of beauty, such encounters are commonplace. Introducing myself, I expressed admiration for her beauty and proposed a date for the upcoming Friday night. "If I agree, will you kindly remove the drool from your chin?" she teased coyly. What? "Oh yes, the drool. Absolutely, it's gone." I stammered like a clumsy fool. "Well, it's quite evident you're not one of those smooth talkers with rehearsed lines. So yes, let's go out on Friday night." I got her phone number. That Friday night, we ate at a nice Italian restaurant in Ames. While I listened closely, she told me stories about her life from when she was 3 years old until now. It seemed like she only stopped talking when our main course came. We just clicked easily, and within a month, we were spending almost all our free time together. She wasn't just smart, she was also funny and confident. I thought I looked okay, not amazing, but I was pretty good at sports and did well in school. Tracy said I wasn't always smooth with my words, but I felt good about myself. However, when I asked her out, I knew I was aiming beyond my league. But hey, you don't get anything if you don't try, right? Tracy and I had our first bed contact on our 6th date. None of us had any experience. But at that point, I didn't have many partners, and I realized that it was the same with Tracy. Despite my limited experience, I had a secret weapon. I actually read articles in various adult magazines, not just looking at images. Judging by the enthusiastic reviews I received from my partners, I must have been very skilled at this, and the knowledge I gained through it was not in vain. Tracy and I tied the knot shortly after graduating. Finding jobs was easy for both of us. She got a job as a 3rd-grade teacher, and I started working as an accountant. With steady incomes, we bought a house a couple of years later. About a year after moving in, we had our only child, a daughter. Life was good. Our love life, while not super adventurous, was satisfying enough for both of us. But as time went on, like many couples, we didn't have sex as often because we were busy with work and getting older. Even after our daughter went to college, we still had a strong connection and had sex 3 or 4 times a week. Sometimes I worried that Tracy might cheat on me, but those worries didn't last long. She would mention a new teacher at her school flirting with her, but she never showed any interest in them. I thought it was just my own insecurities. Tracy is undeniably attractive, and I couldn't fault anyone for admiring her, but admiration was as far as it should go. I made my stance clear to Tracy early in our relationship. There's no room for sharing. She echoed the sentiment, assuring me she felt the same. While she didn't mind if I glanced at other women, any physical contact would be unacceptable. I respected her boundaries wholeheartedly. That was our understanding until 3 years ago. We found ourselves at the annual summer party hosted by our neighbors 3 doors down in our fashionable neighborhood. Scott and Wendy Harris always throw a day-long bash at their place the weekend following the 4th of July. Tracy and I make it a point to attend every year, along with most of the neighbors on our block, and we always have a fantastic time. Scott and Wendy are really good hosts. They serve delicious food and drinks. They have a big pool and a sand volleyball court in their yard. Most of the guests they invite, even those from outside the neighborhood, are fun to be around, except for one person. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The party starts at noon, and Tracy and I arrived around 1 o'clock. I went to the bar to get Tracy a white Zinfandel and myself a Michelob, and then we started talking to people. At first we stuck together, but then we started talking to different people, both inside and outside. This had never been a problem before. Every now and then I would check on Tracy to see if she needed more to drink or something to eat, or she would come find me. Usually we said goodbye with a quick kiss on the lips. While I was talking to some male neighbors, Tracy was chatting with a group of women across the yard when a few new people showed up. There was a man with 2 women, and Scott went to say hello to them. That's when I noticed Tracy's sudden change in behavior. As I watched the newcomers, I glanced at Tracy and saw that she had stopped talking to her friends. She was staring at the new people with a mix of surprise and interest. At the time, I didn't fully understand her expression, but it was clear she was really interested, and I have to admit, I felt a bit worried. After about 10 seconds, Tracy looked at me, blushed, and then went back to her friends. Have you ever had that feeling that something isn't quite right, but you can't figure out what it is? I felt that about an hour later when I couldn't find Tracy in the yard. I got her a glass of white wine and started looking for her. Eventually, I found her with one of the new guys. His arm was around her, and his hand was on her hip, which seemed too familiar considering they had just met. The group seemed to be engaged in friendly conversation, but the scene left me uneasy. I believed in myself and trusted my wife completely, and I didn't want to make a scene, but I felt that the situation was getting too close for ordinary friends. I approached the group from behind Tracy and her new acquaintance, grabbing his wrist tightly to remove it from my hip. We haven't been introduced yet, although you seem quite at ease with my wife, I stated with a stern tone. He attempted to pull away, but my firm grip kept him in place. Tracy, who seemed flushed even before my arrival, blushed even deeper upon realizing my presence. "Oh, Greg, please," she exclaimed, noticing my hold on the man's wrist. "Greg, meet Charles Delane. He teaches literature from Europe at the college and started working there last year. He's French and didn't do anything wrong, so I didn't say anything about where he put his hand. The others in the group agreed with me, so I let go of Charles' wrist and shook his hand firmly to show that I was in charge. Tracy then introduced me to everyone else, almost like she forgot. "I thought you might want more wine," I said as I gave Tracy a glass, looking at Charles. "You're so kind, my dear husband," she said back. Charles, who said his name like the French do, seemed like a typical European guy to me. I have to admit, he was good-looking, about 32 years old, 6 feet tall, and weighed around 170 pounds. He had a scruffy beard and hair that looked like it couldn't decide if it wanted to be long or short. He had a French accent when he spoke English, which made me think he might be dating a lot of his students, no matter if they were boys or girls. After we all met, Charles went back to talking about Victor Hugo or someone like that. I felt like I had shown that I was there, so I went back outside to the yard. Tracy and Charles came out to join us for a sand volleyball game. I always played hard in these games, and my team was winning a lot. There were usually a lot of people watching from the deck, where Tracy and Charles were sitting. I was focused on the game, but I saw them being friendly, like touching each other's arms and hands, smiling, and Tracy even blushed sometimes. Sometimes I waved to her, and she waved back. After playing for about an hour and winning a lot, I realized Tracy and Charles weren't sitting where they had been. Scanning the bar and grill area, I couldn't spot them either. Citing fatigue in my 47-year-old legs and a desperate need for a beer. As I departed, I endured good-natured teasing about my age. Maintaining the charade, I headed to the bar for another Mitch, then wandered aimlessly around the yard before eventually entering the house. I searched through every accessible room and strained to listen at the closed doors, but found no trace of Tracy or Charles, and casually inquired if she had seen my wife recently. Sure, she and Charles went outside to check something in his car. Wendy replied nonchalantly, "Which car does he drive?" I asked, a hint of irritation creeping into my tone. At that moment, realization dawned on Wendy. We've been friends and neighbors for more than 15 years, so when she looked worried and said, "He drives a grey Saab," I got concerned. I went outside and looked down the street in both directions, but I didn't see the car. Right then, Wendy came out to the driveway. "I'm sure it's nothing, Greg," she said in a calming voice. "They probably just went to the college for a bit." "Yeah, maybe," I said back, not really believing it, and then I walked away. The local college was only 5 minutes from our house. I decided to check it out myself. I drove to the school and combed through every parking lot they had. No sob. I tried calling Tracy's cell, but it went straight to voicemail, indicating she was either busy or her phone was off. I left a message, followed by 4 more over the next hour while I waited at home. I also reached out to her parents and her sister, asking if they had heard from her that day. They all said no. That's when the old Sherlock Holmes quote came to mind. Once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. I sat in my favorite chair in the family room, staring at the big blank screen for what felt like a long time. I didn't even bother turning on the TV. I couldn't stop thinking about my wife and that French guy being together. I wondered why we even helped France in the wars. Maybe we should have let the Germans take over. I couldn't sleep all night. I stayed in the chair, looking at the TV without sound. I thought Tracy might come back late at night, but she didn't. I started worrying that Charles and Tracy might have been in a car crash. By 8 a.m., I couldn't stand not knowing anymore. I dialed the local sheriff's office, identifying myself and inquiring about any accidents overnight. Disappointingly, they reported none. I made 4 more attempts to call Tracy's phone, but each time I received no response. As noon approached, I heard a car pull up in the driveway, indicated by the sound of a single door slamming shut. Approximately 45 seconds later, Tracy inserted her key into the lock, opened the door, and entered. A few moments later, she noticed me in the family room and silently seated herself on the sofa across the room. Any lingering doubts I had about their activities were dispelled by her appearance. At least she had the decency to show her before returning home. Her long blonde hair, which had been loose yesterday, was now pulled back into a damp ponytail, and she wore no makeup. She wore the same yellow dress as yesterday, and her chest, shoulders, and arms looked pink from the sun. She looked really happy, like someone who had a great time, and I have to admit, she looked amazing. She didn't look sorry or guilty at all. If anything, she looked a bit smug. "Nice of you to finally come," I said sarcastically. "Did you have fun last night and this morning?" "Actually, I did," she replied smugly. That wasn't the response I anticipated. "Listen, Greg," she continued calmly. "Have you ever experienced an incredible physical and emotional connection with someone from the moment you laid eyes on them? It's almost electrifying and wonderful and incredible." "Yes, I have," I responded promptly. "I married that woman." Her composed demeanor shattered, revealing a hint of recognition in her eyes, breaking through her calm facade. "I found mine yesterday. I can't explain it. I need him. I love him. Just like that." "Are you crazy?" I yelled. "You're ready to end our 25 years of marriage over a feeling? Didn't I mean anything to you?" "I do love you, Greg," she said, crying. "Our time together has been great, but the connection I have with him is amazing. I love you, but I'm in love with him. It's amazing." "I understand," I said. "Give me some time to adjust, and I'll throw you a celebration." I snapped at her. "So should we start the divorce process, or do you want to? We'll split everything evenly, including selling the house. I don't think we need to rush into divorce just yet," she replied, her voice tinged with exasperation. "Let's see how things unfold. We can make major decisions later." Now it was my turn to feel exasperated. "What?" I argued. "That's not fair. You can't keep me around as a backup. If you're with him, then go be with him now. As far as I'm concerned, we were done when you were with him yesterday. Saying it again just makes me more sure." But, she stuttered. "Okay, I'll start the divorce process and move out by the end of the week." True to my word, I moved my belongings out of the house by the end of the week. I took a couple of personal days off work to sort it out. While I was loading my pickup one evening, Scott and Wendy Harris approached me and apologized for inviting Charles to their party. I stopped them politely, reminding them they couldn't have predicted Tracy's actions. "Still, we feel somewhat responsible," Wendy said, avoiding eye contact. My attorney prepared the divorce papers, and Tracy was served within a month. It seemed she assumed I would procrastinate. As my lawyer informed me that the process server mentioned she reacted strongly when he handed her the papers, this might explain why she appeared at my new apartment just 2 days later and forcefully entered when I answered the doorbell. "How could you initiate this if you truly love me as you claim?" she cried out when she came into my apartment. I tried to calm down, but I was really angry. "Are you really clueless?" I snapped. "You're with another man. What did you expect me to do? I might love you, but I won't just sit here while you cheat on me. And if things with him don't work out, what am I supposed to do? Just give me some time. If things go wrong, I'll come back and be the perfect wife. We can grow old together. You're living in a fantasy." I countered sharply. "I'm not granting you permission to pursue your ideal partner while you decide if it suits you. Furthermore, if he's truly your ideal partner, why would it not work out? Charles is currently going through a divorce with his wife, and they're dealing with some financial matters. Does that mean he could be Mr. Right for you, but you might not be his missus, right?" I inquired. She continued to stammer before I eventually demanded that she leave my apartment, or I would forcefully remove her. Tracy and her lawyer attempted to delay the proceedings as much as possible. Meanwhile, Mr. Wonderful moved into my former house and assumed my position. 4 months later, as I exited Michael's with a colleague following a business dinner, I spotted a familiar duo making their way to the door. Charles and a visibly pregnant Tracy. She appeared to be approximately 3 months pregnant. I halted in surprise, blocking their entry. "Oh my God," I whispered, my companion pausing beside me, clearly bewildered as the four of us stood face to face. "Serge, I want you to meet my wife. Well, for a few more months at least, and her boyfriend, Charles Delane." Serge felt really awkward, but he tried to stay polite in this uncomfortable situation. "But," he stammered, "she's pregnant. Is that your baby?" "Definitely not mine," I said cheerfully. "You're a jerk, Greg. You know that," Tracy said sharply as she and Charles walked past us into the restaurant. Later, Wendy Harris told me that Tracy was indeed 3 months pregnant. It turned out Tracy had stopped using birth control. "She really likes Charles and wanted to have his baby," I told Wendy. "Good luck with that." The divorce was final a few months later, and 2 months after that, Tracy had a baby boy. They named him Charles Jr., maybe to show how much they admired Charles. Our daughter Morgan wasn't happy about Tracy having another child, especially because of how we split up and because I wasn't the father. I was proud of Morgan for supporting me through all of this. Even though I knew Tracy had the baby, I hadn't talked to her or seen her since we met at the restaurant months ago. I knew we'd run into each other again since we lived in the same town, but I was surprised the first time I saw her after the baby was born. She had gained weight, and it looked like having the baby had made her 49-year-old body tired. I almost didn't recognize the somewhat grandmotherly figure pushing a stroller with a toddler in it at the local mall. "Come on, Greg, there's no need to be so rude," a familiar voice called out as I hurried past them one Saturday afternoon. I abruptly halted my steps, unable to resist the urge, and took a slow, almost cinematic second look at the woman and the baby before me. Oh no, it was Tracy and her son. "Hey there, long time," I managed to say, trying to compose myself. "To you too," she replied. The baby, predictably, was adorable. He inherited Tracy's hair and eye color, but had his father's slightly darker complexion. "Wow, he's really cute," I said honestly. Tracy blushed a little and thanked me. "It's been a long time since we've seen each other, and well, seeing you with a stroller." I apologized for not recognizing her right away, but she seemed uncomfortable with my apology. She brushed it off politely without saying anything. Even though I thought she was really attractive after Morgan was born many years ago, now she was over 20 years older, and since this baby wasn't mine, I guess I wasn't feeling any romantic feelings. We talked for a few more minutes, mostly about how tired she was from lack of sleep. I could sense she was genuinely sad, which was different from how she was after Morgan was born. Finally, I said goodbye and went back to shopping for what I needed. The next encounter with Tracy occurred at the Harris Summer Gathering about half a year later. Scott and Wendy had always felt remorseful that Tracy had met Charles at their party, but I reassured them then, and truly meant it, that I didn't hold them responsible for Tracy's regrettable choice. Nevertheless, Wendy persisted in trying to set me up with her single and divorced acquaintances, and I must admit some of those introductions were quite promising. Despite skipping the last 2 summer parties, they continued to extend invitations, and this time I decided to attend, even though they cautioned me that Tracy and Charles would also be present. I wouldn't be the instigator, and I intended to stick to that promise. I had been at the party for a couple of hours when I spotted Tracy and Charles entering the backyard. Since their baby wasn't with them, I assumed they had left the child with a babysitter. Tracy had shed some of her pregnancy weight and didn't appear as matrimonially as the last time I had seen her, but there was an unmistakable sadness in her once lively blue eyes. Even when she smiled, there was a vacantness in her gaze that I couldn't shake. I dealt with the awkwardness right away by going up to Tracy and Charles. I gave Tracy a quick hug and shook Charles' hand. I could tell they were both a little surprised, and I saw Wendy holding her breath as I walked over. We chatted for a minute before I went back to my friends by the grill. When the sand volleyball game started, I joined one of the teams. In the second game, while I was playing, I saw Tracy sitting in a chair, watching and cheering. Mr. Wonderful wasn't with her. After we lost the second game, we had to wait for our next turn. While I was getting a beer, I looked over at Tracy, sitting there alone. Some things never change. I thought to myself, grabbing my drink and heading indoors. Upon checking the third room, the den, my suspicions were confirmed. Charles had his arm around Marilyn Jansen's waist as he conversed with a small group, while Marilyn gazed at him with desire. Marilyn, a former neighbor from down the street, was unmistakably married. I should have kept it to myself. I thought to myself, if this is what I suspect, then he plans to be intimate with this woman tonight by betraying Tracy. If I don't say anything, it will be my fault. If I speak out, it will cause chaos, and I will still be wrong. A real friend would have informed her, but I wasn't a real friend. I used to be her husband. Why should I have to do anything about it? Then something happened. Marilyn's husband, Troy, who was on my sand volleyball team, must have followed me inside to talk about our game plan. He saw the same thing I did, Charles hugging Troy's wife, and she looked like she was really into Charles. "You're a terrible person. Get away from my wife, you jerk," Troy shouted at Charles as he ran towards them. At first, I thought about stepping in to stop the fight, but then I realized it was better to let my teammate handle it. Before Charles could get away from his wife, Troy grabbed Charles' arm and twisted it hard. There was a loud crack, and Charles screamed in pain. More people came into the room because of the noise. A nurse from the ER checked Charles' arm and called for an ambulance. It arrived with 2 police officers about 10 minutes later. They talked to everyone there in case Charles wanted to report Troy. The older officer, Sec. Jim Hill, seemed to be about my age, while the younger officer, Officer Kathleen McDonald, looked to be around 40 and had Irish features. I made sure to tell my side of the story to Officer McDonald. Tracy was crying and holding on to Charles' other arm, trying to comfort him while the EMS helped him. It was evident she was unaware of the events leading to the altercation. Once Charles was stabilized, the EMS transported him to the hospital, leaving Tracy behind. She looked at me for guidance and I nodded, directing her to Officer McDonald. Before signaling 5 with my fingers, McDonald noticed Tracy waiting for me, so she proceeded to interrogate me. I recounted my version of events, mentioning that Charles had taken my wife from me at a party 3 years ago. Her reaction to this revelation was one of surprise. "Yet you're still planning to accompany her to the hospital?" she queried. "Are you simply exceedingly kind or utterly foolish?" I hadn't anticipated that question. Looking up at her, I noticed she was trying to suppress a smile. "Utterly foolish," I replied. This response caught her off guard, and she let out a slight chuckle. I found the sound pleasant. After a few more inquiries, I finished giving my statement. McDonald authorized me to escort Tracy to the hospital, but before I departed, she cautioned me that Tracy might not believe my account. "I'm not counting on it," I replied. As I began to turn away, she moved on to the next person for a statement, but a sudden impulse struck me, prompting words to spill out. "Perhaps it would be wise to give me your card, just in case I recall anything else, officer." She flashed a grin, her eyes shining. She took out a card from her uniform and quickly wrote down what seemed to be her phone number. "Thank you, officer," I said with a laugh. Then I turned to Tracy and said, "Let's go." On the way to the hospital, Tracy asked about Charles. I told her what happened, expecting her not to believe me. "Can't you move on, Greg?" she whined. "It's been 3 years. "It's not about moving on, Trace," I said back. "Charles shouldn't have hurt Marilyn Jansen, and Troy was right to do something about it. Maybe if I had been that brave, you and I would still be together." The words came out unexpectedly, and Tracy started crying as she turned away in the car. I dropped Tracy off at the emergency room, but didn't go inside with her. After we got divorced, she and Charles had to share a small house with the money we got from selling our house. With her busy for the night, I reached for the card Officer Kathleen MacDonald had given me earlier from my pocket. She's quite a nice woman, I thought to myself. I'll play it cool. So I waited 3 days before calling Officer Kathleen MacDonald. She answered the phone after 2 rings. "Could you have taken any longer?" she joked. "I might have been engaged or married by now." "Maybe you're right, but rushing things won't make you the next Mrs. Ellen Gregerson," I joked back. "Now who's being cheeky?" she said. "How do you know I'll say yes when you ask me out?" she added. "And no, I don't want to go to an Irish pub for a date." Her mention of an Irish pub caught me off guard, because, truthfully, that's exactly where I had planned to take her. It just seemed fitting, taking an Irish girl to an Irish pub. She noticed my hesitation and correctly guessed my intention. "What's with you guys? Can't any of you be more creative? Just because I have flaming red hair, you all assume Irish pub," she remarked. I hesitated briefly before resorting to my backup plan. We had an excellent Greek restaurant in the city that I adored, and Greek cuisine was a departure from Irish fare. After a moment's thought, she responded positively. "Thanks for being spontaneous," she said. When I said no to the Irish pub, most guys suggest Asian food, but I don't like food that looks like it could attract bugs. I laughed at her joke, feeling like we could really get along. We talked for another hour about lots of things. I found out she was actually 45 years old and had been divorced for 10 years because her ex cheated on her. She had a son in his second year at Michigan State University, studying pre-law. Dinner on Saturday night was great, and I picked her up from her house on the south side of town. She looked amazing in her black dress and high heels. She had a nice figure, a pretty face, and bright red hair. She epitomized the term beautiful. We had one of those meandering conversations that seemed to touch on everything, and yet nothing at all. Her voice was so captivating. I could have listened to it all night. She didn't appear to be in a rush to settle down with a husband, much like I wasn't eager to hurry into finding a wife. This attitude made her both relaxed and intriguingly unpredictable, especially with her naturally curious nature, almost like that of a detective. She posed some probing questions, showing that she was not only listening, but also engaging deeply with what I was saying. After dinner, I drove her home. I didn't suggest going back to my place, and when we reached hers, she didn't extend an invitation either. We said goodnight at her door, but then she surprised me by quickly kissing my cheek. I must have turned really red. I said goodnight and practically floated back to my car. I don't even remember driving home. It felt like I was 16 again. Her kiss felt so nice, and I'm pretty sure she was wearing White Shoulders perfume. She called me on Sunday morning and invited me over for bagels and lox at her place. How could I say no to that? A few days later, Wendy and Scott invited me to dinner, partly to apologize for what happened recently and partly to hear my side of the story. It turned out that Charles had been threatening legal action against them, and Troy Jansen. "Doesn't this guy think he's the ultimate catch?" Scott exclaimed at one point. "He is quite handsome and undeniably charming," Wendy remarked before earning a sharp look from Scott. According to the Harris, Troy spent the remainder of the weekend behind bars before being bailed out on Monday morning. Upon returning home, Marilyn and their children were nowhere to be found. They had sought refuge with her mother in a neighboring town. Scott said he thought their 12-year marriage might be over. "Tell Troy to talk to me," I said. "Let him know I understand what he's going through. I'm here if he needs someone to talk to, and I'll support him in court." "We'll tell him," Scott said. "I'm sure he'll appreciate your help." Then Scott said, "By the way, we've decided this will be the last summer party we host. It's too stressful." While Scott talked, Wendy seemed focused on her plate of peas. It was clear things hadn't been the same in Harlan since the party. A few months later, when 47-year-old Wendy's baby bump started showing, my suspicions were confirmed. I didn't need to guess who the father was because Scott called me to tell me. "Can you believe this mess?" he practically yelled over the phone. Scott informed me that he remained oblivious until Wendy began experiencing morning sickness every other day, mirroring the pattern she had during her pregnancies with their 2 children years ago. Upon realizing this, Scott confronted her, and she confessed to having an affair with Charles for over a year. However, she mostly insisted on using protection. They ran out during a weekend getaway to a motel where they decided to forego it a few times. Following this revelation, Scott jokingly asked for a referral to my attorney, quipping about a friends and family discount. According to Scott, Charles and Wendy had relocated to an apartment near the campus, leaving Tracy and her son to manage on their own. "It's not my issue," I retorted. I didn't expect how complicated women can be. While I was eating lunch at a nearby McDonald's, Tracy came over to my table with her son. They held hands and put Tracy's food on the table in front of me. Her son sat down next to me. "Hi, Tracy." "Hi, CJ," I said to them. "Hello, sir," CJ said politely. "He's growing up so fast," I said to Tracy, looking at her son. "You might have a future 6-footer on your hands." From her expression, it was evident that Tracy acknowledged my attempt to be courteous. Yet there was an underlying unease apparent on her face, suggesting that if she didn't address it soon, she might reach a breaking point. "Come on, just ask." I gently urged her, observing her son unwrap a cheeseburger. "Did you truly love me as much as you claimed?" She began softly. "Because if you did, why didn't you fight for me like Troy did for Marilyn? Why didn't you ask me to return like someone who genuinely loved me would? Why haven't you visited my house to check on me and my son, maybe even invite us over?" I didn't see this coming. Was she saying it's my fault? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm and not get too angry. "So it's all my fault, huh? You're acting like you didn't do anything wrong." My voice got louder as I spoke. That wasn't what I meant to happen. I just wanted to make my point. "Whoa," I exclaimed, raising my hand. "Remember when I removed Charles' hand from your waist, and you insisted there was nothing going on, asking me not to cause trouble? I trusted you completely and didn't pursue it further. Forgive me for putting so much faith in you. If I had known then what I know now, I wouldn't have trusted you. Then when you returned home the next day at noon, what could I say? The damage was already done, repeatedly by the looks of it. So what was there left to argue about? You had given yourself to another man and broken our vows. There was nothing left for me to fight for. You made it crystal clear. This was your decision alone, and I had no say in it. So what remained to fight for? You were no longer mine. You belonged to him. But you never attempted to change my mind," she complained, "or convince me to stay." "Nothing. If you truly loved me," I asked, "how many times did you sleep with Charles that first night in mourning?" "I'm sure it was more than once," I remarked. "The first time might have been a mistake, and I could have maybe forgiven you. But choosing to do it again was a decision you made on purpose. After that, you just kept breaking my heart into pieces. And then you had the nerve to say you had a great time, even an amazing time, if I remember correctly. You said you and him had this almost magical connection. You didn't feel sorry at all. You know, lust and slut have the same 4 letters. So what was I supposed to think? They say if you love something, let it go. If it comes back, it's yours. If not, it never was. And then, just to make things worse, you have his baby when you're 48. I couldn't persuade you to have a second child in 25 years, but not only do you readily welcome Mr. Wonderful, but then you let him impregnate you. So is this all about your wounded male ego?" she retorted, perhaps a tad too sharply for my liking. My attention snapped to that remark, but with the child present at the table, I resisted taking the bait. "No, your decision to be with him and have his child was yours alone. It's clear you loved him enough to want his child, even if you never wanted another with me." "I understand." We sat in silence for a moment. Tracy seemed hesitant, and I sensed where the conversation was headed, but someone had to address it. "So what are you going to do now?" I asked. "You and Charles never got married, but he's recognized as the father, right? You should at least ask him for child support." "I'll let Wendy handle him," Tracy replied. "But you're right. I should ask that cheating jerk for child support. That's good advice." "Do you ever think about what could have been between us?" she asked, wondering how things might have turned out. "To be honest, no," I said softly. "You hurt me so much that I never wanted to think about what might have been. I'll remember the good times we had, but that's all in the past now." We kept eating. I watched the boy play with his French fries, reminding me of our daughter Morgan. "He's a good kid," I said. "I'm glad something positive came from our relationship." Despite our initial connection, we never connected as deeply as Tracy and I did. Our physical relationship was more important than our emotional one, and we never truly loved each other. Tracy seemed to realize that at that moment. She shook her head sadly, tears filling her eyes. She had given up real love for just wanting something temporary, and now she understood that. "My partner and I celebrated our 10th anniversary with a trip to Spain," I said. "It wasn't what we planned, but it was perfect for us. As we get closer to retiring, we look back on our success in our jobs and our growing family. Even though we're always busy, our bond is still strong," I added. "I love her more every day, especially with our children and grandchildren. Our life is full of happiness." "I see Tracy around town sometimes, but we hardly ever talk," I said. "She's focused on raising CJ, who's 13 now. Tracy hasn't gotten married again and hardly ever goes on dates. Her ex, Mr. Wonderful, had to be made to pay child support. Her life seems kind of sad, but we all decide how we want to live. I finish by saying, I don't regret moving on with my life.